I will always have the belief that the best DLC for games is the kind that is big enough that it could easily be a game of its own. Sometimes they do in fact turn into standalone DLCs, but this has become so rare these days that finding a big expansion becomes an absolute godsend. This is exactly the case with Blood and Wine. This DLC serves as the epilogue for the Witcher trilogy and the series overall unless a 4th game comes out. It's so big, so vast, and so amazing, it only makes the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk 2077 all the more sad and unfortunate. But we are here to review the good times and how back in the day CDPR knocked it out of the park, so let's get started. Blood and Wine takes place after the end of The Witcher 3's main campaign. After a climactic adventure, Geralt is summoned by the Duchess herself to the colorful region of Toussaint. A serial killer is on the loose, and because it's a supernatural kind of killer, Geralt's expertise as a witcher is needed. What follows is yet another grand adventure, but one with the biggest reward Geralt could ever ask for. A home he can call his own, with a humble wine business to sustain for the rest of his life. Of course, this is The Witcher, and nothing is ever so simple, so the seemingly standard monster hunting quest unravels a grand conspiracy against the very kingdom and the people of Uclair, deconstructing its virtuous chivalric values and giving yet another example of how poor communication can kill. Mechanically, it will be redundant to talk about the gameplay for the 3rd time, so instead I will say that this DLC brings out the full potential of the game's mechanics, especially with the combat. While the main campaign had its fair share of brawls and battles, it is in this DLC where fighting enemies turns into an all-out battle royale. It was in these instances of all-out combat where I finally got the full hang of what I could do while sword fighting, and felt very satisfied while leaving a pile of corpses of my enemies. It is also in this DLC where exploration becomes a quest in itself. Almost everything you do in this region is tied to one of the side quests of the DLC, and with the quest in The Witcher 3 always leading to more quests, it makes the whole adventure full of its own stories and your own personal anecdotes. Toussaint is an enormous region, and while at first glance it looks more peaceful and prosperous than the war-torn northern kingdoms, it still has its own share of issues. Bandits roam free, knights can be found fighting for their lives, and monsters are on the loose. That's another thing I came to enjoy from the gameplay. There is more boss fights, and they are just as intense as they were in the main game. They are also a major wake-up call. Even if you are coming post-game and post-Hearts of Stone, if you are not careful or level up enough, you can and you will die. Some of the monsters are no pushovers either. There are new plant enemies and they are annoying to say the least. They can tear apart your health, they move around fast and away from you, and they were easily my least favorite enemies. Which says a lot of how darn good the gameplay is when everything else is a good old-fashioned adrenaline rush, fighting monsters to my heart's content. But that's not where the gameplay goodness ends. Since you are in a region that treasures chivalric virtues, you have Geralt take place in a major tournament and win all the glory once again, using mechanics from the main game and adding their own unique twist to spice things up. If there is a downside I have to pick with this DLC, is that the second half of the main quest locks you out of all the side content as it goes straight into the endgame, which is understandable on one hand. I always want developers to make an urgent story to keep you on track, even if it is an open world, and it makes more sense for Geralt to focus on stopping the serial killer. But at the same time, this is juxtaposed with how you can deviate from your investigation and go on to many other adventures. Gameplay and story segregation are of course in full force as the killer won't make a move until you advance the main quest, but ultimately, I guess this is why it's not a good idea to write an urgent conflict while also giving the player piles of side content. Not that there's anything wrong with it, mind you. With that being said, I can see why they took this approach. After all, this is Geralt's final adventure for the time being, so might as well give him one big playground to mess around for the last time. But because I prefer to keep my reviews spoiler free, I'd rather keep the details minimal so you, the viewer, can go and experience it for yourself. And much like the main campaign, this is a DLC I would encourage anyone to give it a go, because the beauty comes from the entire sum of its parts. Because again, this is an RPG. There is more to this world than simply fighting monsters or investigating crimes. Sometimes you have to put your weapons down and enjoy the view. This game continues to have some of the most gorgeous environments I've experienced in a game. The world is so immersive, and it only gets complemented with how it's used as backdrop for some very memorable character moments. Moments as simple as getting set up in a new home and getting to meet the staff, stopping a moment to watch people dancing in the night with the street bards, walking around a beautiful city among its people, or simply sitting around and sharing a drink with a friend. What makes this kind of game so impactful for the players is how Geralt is more than just your avatar. These characters are their own person, and you get to experience both their good and their bad moments, their highs and their lows. It makes every gameplay moment you spend with them all the more meaningful, and it also makes you think carefully about your choices. There are pathways and outcomes that you can and you will miss depending on what you make Geralt say or do. This goes for both the main quest and the side quests. But again, going into detail about them right here will be a serious disservice to this fantastic DLC. I don't think there is much else I can say about Blood and Wine other than, if you haven't played it, or the main game for that matter, please give it a go. It's an absolute classic, and it's a testament on how CDPR was capable of making great games. At least for a while, that is. It goes without saying, but Blood and Wine gets a perfect 10 from me. I did not have a single dull moment from this game. It's one of the most amazing and immersive experiences I had in gaming, and this is one of those games I will revisit in the future, or at least until the developers fix Cyberpunk, which will probably be in a couple of years.